to the Weekly Bioanalysis, a KCAS podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the 41st episode of the Weekly Bioanalysis, the official podcast of KCAS Bioanalytical and Biomarker services. KCAS is a bioanalytical CRO serving the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries for over 40 years now. My name is Dominic Guarino, and I have been in the LBA and cell-based assay space for over 27 years. I'm here with my co-host, John Perkins.
Hello, I'm John Perkins. I'm also Senior Scientific Advisor, and I've been in the Bioanalytical LCMS space for around 26 years.
John and I are Senior Scientific Advisors at KCS, and either or both of us are available to answer any questions you may have regarding this podcast or any of KCS services. I'm located in Kansas. John is in upstate New York, and our producers are in Missouri and Kansas City areas, so we're kind of scattered about. We are very excited to have you listening to the 41st episode of our podcast, which is now available virtually everywhere. You can find it on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, Amazon, and many others. Wherever you choose to find and play your podcast, you can now likely find the Weekly Bioanalysis. We welcome all of you, whether you are joining us for the first time or if you're a regular listener. As many of you know, we started this podcast as part of the restrictions due to COVID, and this gave us an opportunity to continue to get to know everybody while we went through these unusual times. So we were unable to meet face to face, but this was our ability to communicate with all of you. The podcast was an idea we'd always had, but suddenly it became the perfect medium. So now that we're coming out of the pandemic, we're still doing the podcast, which is great. For those of you that are unfamiliar, the podcast is a review of the latest news and resources. Then we focus on a topic of our choosing before discussing any feedback we may have had. We're constantly looking for topics, and we'd be happy to discuss something that you want us to cover. Then we'll give you a little wrap up, a little teaser of next episode, and then we'll let you know what's coming in the future. Yeah. So again, we're, John, fired up to be here, and we look forward to a fun episode today. John, why don't you kick us off going over today's podcast topic a little bit before we jump into the news and notes?
Sure. This, as usual, will follow the same structure as every other week, where we'll talk about COVID and non-COVID news. And then our main topic is the need for regulation in the pharma industry, oversight of manufacturing issues and clinical trials. And this is really talking about the kind of things that have been observed recently at a manufacturing facility and the FDA's role in keeping us all on the right track in terms of supporting drug development.
Yeah, John, it's one that we've touched on in previous podcasts, and it'll be exciting to discuss, the story, the history of it, and then some of the implications it has to how we function as a CRO or even the CRO industry in general. So great topic, John. I'm very excited. Why don't you kick us off with our news section first?
Sure. This first topic is talking about COVID-19 has only made loneliness worse among seniors. Here's how Anthem is tackling this issue. And this sort of mirrors something we talked about a few weeks ago, where soccer clubs in the UK were reaching out to older fans and giving them phone calls and things like that. This is Anthem, who are part of Blue Cross Blue Shield, doing a similar thing where they basically assign people a social care partner, and they do like a psychological assessment of the people they're working with, and also figure out any other needs they might have to help them. And it's just working to get people connected. If they can't connect personally, then how can they do it via phone calls? So they'll do regular phone calls or online and get them in touch with groups with like interest. It talks about one person who was able to get in touch with a virtual quilting group. I think it's just key that, we talk about COVID and all the conditions, but the mental piece we really haven't touched on too much. And the sort of keeping people in contact is definitely going to be important. Although as we get vaccinated and more people are out, we can probably talk about that later, the way things are changing around here. But it's almost like you've still got an you've got to get back used to mixing with people, and this is so. I really applaud what Anthem are doing. I love this type of thing, but ultimately, it's really interesting observing people as we're actually getting out more. How people are still we're all behaving really weird round.
No, for sure. No, you're right. Anthem should be applauded for their efforts to, keep down it's loneliness, depression. That's always been something that has struck not just the U.S. worldwide in these times. But this is a great story of how they're trying to connect people, as you said, and there is, like, I think of it as being you got to get immersed back into the world, John. Is what has to happen to all of us. And even now, it's awkward to walk into a place without a mask on, even though I'm fully vaccinated.
Yes, as I was talking, I was just thinking about last night. I was having a quick walk around the village, and I was walking just down one street just around the corner from my house, past a couple, and I mean, we know that outdoors is no issue. We're all vaccinated, but they still crossed the road to avoid me, and then came back. They basically circled round me, and it's like, you don't have to do that.
Yeah. You still get dirty looks sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Less of it now. If you have.
It's interesting because obviously in New York there has been very much the mask mandate everywhere, and over the weekend businesses have largely dropped that. So where there was the sign saying you have to wear a mask, it mostly gone. The one place which I was utterly shocked by, AutoZone was still insisting on a mask, but things like Trader Joe's and other supermarkets, there's like gas stations and stuff, it's all gone. But people are really confused about what they should wear. So like, I mean, I walk into Target and the signs have gone, and most people wear masks. And then I have to say, I did it. I walked in without a mask, but then seeing everyone else has got a mask on, it's like, well, I'll put my mask on, so I might as well.
Yeah. You guys are like a week. You're like 2 weeks behind us. That's how it was a couple weeks ago. We didn't, the mask mandate was lifted in Kansas, I think, at the end of early May, and so you'd walk into places, but you'd put it on immediately because 9 out of 10 people's got a mask on. I didn't want to be that guy, so I'm putting the mask on. But now, like, it was funny. Church has really been the best place for me to measure. The first week they lifted the mask mandate, 95% of the people still had a mask on. The next week, 85%. And then the following week, maybe half. Well, this week, maybe only 20% was still wearing a mask. But it's changed. John, before we move off of this subject, I saw a great similar story related to elderly and I feel like they were second graders. And this was up in like Minnesota area. And so they were pen pals throughout the pandemic.
Oh, really?
And then they got together and met. So they had been virtually doing things. And so it was a great story. Saw it on the news. I think it was the CBS Morning News, maybe, which is one of my favorites on Sunday morning. The Sunday morning CBS News. That's what it was on. And they showed, like, these people have been pen pals for a year and they finally got to meet. So this is some great stories. I think we're going to see a lot of these types of Anthem stories in the coming weeks about how people have been, we don't, at least for myself personally, I didn't go through a lot of, like, let's say, depression and loneliness, but I think this is going to be part of what we're going to hear more of. And I think even more of those unions, right? People who have gotten to know somebody over the last year, but never really seen them. So this is great stuff, John.
I think the fact that you had your family around you makes it easy for you. Although it's a strange situation, at least you got a group of people that's your familiar group. That it's easy to keep sort of things like depression and stuff like that at bay. But for people who are by themselves, this must have been really, really tough. Yeah. And I mean, it's always a concern when there's another Amish cart gone by. That's weird. Anyway, we've just had, there must be something going on at the end of the village, but we have Amish families that live like the next couple of villages away from here. I've never seen a buggy go past my house, and that's 2 gone past in 10 minutes. Anyway,
you're cracking me up because of buggies, and I just got a big picture of you living in, like, 1900s America, like in the village. You look like
there's a number of Amish farms in the area, so it is interesting when you're driving and you pass them in their carts on like a Saturday and stuff, So
and they make fun of us in the Midwest, John. I don't even see any tractors on the road anymore. No,
really?
You're like Little House on the Prairie. That's what I was trying to think of.
Not really, but we have our small Amish population.
I'm joking, John.
I don't see much of, but I wonder what's going on. Anyway, never mind. So, shall we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, no. Again, I think to the audience, what a great story, and if any of you have those types of stories, we'd love some feedback on how people got through the pandemic and some of these feel-good stories. What a good way to start us off, John. Great story about how Anthem's helping our seniors. So take us away on the next one, which is
just as I watched Amish buggy number 3 go past. The next story actually is more of the same, but it's coming from a completely different angle, and it's the changing work environment. And so it started, the first article I found was, with fewer COVID-19 cases expected this summer, Eli Lilly to welcome all employees back to the Indianapolis HQ. And basically last year they sort of, let's see if I can find it. They basically, since the pandemic was declared last year, about 7,000 office-based Lilly employees have been working from home. And so, if you read the article, it was like I think it was the CEO and the mayor of Indianapolis announced this like in a news conference. But they're sort of encouraging people to come back, and it's like a graded thing. So it's on June 1st, it's 25% come back with masking and distancing required. But then a month later, they're talking opening the headquarters to all employees, but they don't have to be vaccinated, so they'll have to have some controls in place to help people who haven't been vaccinated and maybe can't be vaccinated. But as Lilly were announcing this, Amgen have also announced, and what you're seeing is, across these companies, different blends of how they want their employees to work. So I think Lilly was more, let's bring our people back to headquarters. Amgen's like more, we don't mind if you're virtual, if that's what makes you comfortable. And in the different various articles I jumped about, the banking companies like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs are really pushing to get all employees back. So the Pharma there's a blended approach, and Merck are doing the same, Novartis are talking the same, but there's certainly, we're going to see, I think the impression is we're going to see a change in workplace environment, it's nice article in terms of it's telling us where we're going, but it's also, again, it's just more changes that COVID has induced in us, that companies will be functioning differently.
Yeah, John, it's a good read. I think Lilly's taken a pretty, as they normally do, kind of methodical, statistical approach to their immersion of their employees back in. But there's a study here, or part of it, the Harvard Business poll back in March polled like 1,500 full-time remote workers, and 81% said they didn't want to come back. That's a big number, right? So I think there's a lot of people that say they don't want to come back. And then, on the flip side, there's clear evidence that, activities like learning and apprenticeships and team alignments are always done in person. Although, is that a true statement? I mean, that was always the hypothesis, was that, but over the last, 14, 15 months, respectfully, those things have, maybe they have, it's hard to measure, right? But I think there's a big movement towards people who want the freedom to be able to move wherever they want. That's the impact, John. The housing market's feeling this. Places like Boise, Idaho, they're the number one growing market for housing. It increased like 35%. Again, I was reading some. So they're all coming from, California and such. They want to go to places that have good outdoor living, good, let's call it clean living. And then the cost of living, had been lower, although now with a 35% hike in housing market. So, if I'm in California and I sell my home, I can move to Boise, no problem. But if I live in Boise and I want to go from my 2-bedroom to my 4-bedroom, I can't do it anymore because I can't afford it. I don't have that, money. There's this big, and then I think the other thing is, you see all these office space, John. What's going to happen to that? Like, you heard. It was interesting that one of the major finance groups, like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley's, they say, "Oh, we want them back," but I don't know, John. It's really, it's strange how much this pandemic is going to alter maybe, our lifestyle. I think in 5 years from now, we won't even be thinking about this. We'll be, so that people will just be like, "Oh yeah, I'm a hybrid," that'll be the way to go. So anyway.
You talk about the banking groups wanting people back, but then Pfizer are selling selling facilities. They put a Philadelphia campus up for sale because
Yeah.
they're looking for more modern and flexible workspaces. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of this. It's going to be interesting to see how office spaces are used going forward
Yeah,
because
it'll be interesting.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this before the podcast because Aaron was saying to me, "Well, when are you next coming over to Kansas City?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't really know because ultimately, last time I was there, I spent a good chunk of the 4 or 5 days I was in Kansas City in my hotel room doing Zoom calls. So doesn't seem like much of an investment to come over to still spend most of your time in a room taking phone calls. So I
yeah,
think I really have to, if I'm going to come over to Kansas, have to carefully plan what I'm going to do while I'm there. So it actually becomes you set a rigid agenda to make it worthwhile because otherwise, like I say, it'll be just relocating to do exactly the same as I'm doing at home and
yeah.
with no real benefit to anyone. So
No,
yeah, so that's how
that's a
that
fear.
changes.
Even John, if we travel to meet a BD rep, that's a fear, right? You go, you might have a meeting or two, but you're going to spend two
Yep,
days, the
exactly.
rest of it in a hotel, because there's limited. I think one thing that crossed my mind here was, I wonder, how will or where this if I'm under. I think as somebody who had gone to an office for 25 plus years, I kind of understand that. I think if I'm under 30, I probably thirst to get that interaction. I don't know if that made sense, John. I wonder if
Sure.
there's, because my wife is like me. She's working at Catalan, as I've mentioned. She's a PM there. She's worked remote. Now they're saying, well, you might hybrid. She's a little like, well, why would I want to drive? Everything works here. But we've had that relationship at work where the water cooler talk, so to speak. So we're not, we kind of know how to interact with our colleagues just from, you can rely on years of experience face to face as you do it remotely. I wonder if some, maybe the younger generation, if I'm a little bit younger, I think I want that. Now that I
Sure.
sit here, I would
Yeah.
want to go to the
Yeah.
office more. But anyhow,
Yeah. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how the next 12 months go.
yeah,
Um,
for sure.
yeah.
Another, John, where this is interesting. This impacts me and some of the decision makings my wife and I have. Tell us a little bit about some of the vaccine inequities and what's going on there, right?
Well,
So,
let's start with the biggest piece is I mean, huge news for this country was that the FDA authorizes the Pfizer vaccine for 12 to
mhm.
15-year-olds, and well, that's basically the story. I mean,
Yeah, well, I see that. See, that one impacts
and
me because I got
there's
a
more to
15 year
talk
old,
about.
right?
There's more
Yeah,
to talk about. Basically, it showed 100% efficacy in that age group. So then it's been like I say authorized for use for 12 to 15-year-olds. But then I was actually reading an article in North Carolina, where basically they were seeing the uptake of vaccinations was dropping off. Then this was rolled out to 12 to 15-year-olds. Suddenly you got this really enthusiastic group who want
yeah.
to be vaccinated. So we're seeing an uptick back up, which is great because that helps move us all towards herd immunity, etc. So it's great to see that happen.
Yeah, there's still a reluctancy among people. It's surprising how many people I encounter that are like, "Oh, I'm just gonna wait," and I'm like, it's confusing. There's still a lot of skepticism. I think we believe in an advancement in technology. That's why we're willing to. I kind of equate it to like, would you really wait to go from the VCR to the CD? Like that's how safe it is to me. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
like, oh, I don't want to use a CD because it might cause brain damage. I don't know. Like that's to me, it's like, I don't want to get a vaccine that like has been, been used. These types of, we talked about this. They're not that new, right? They go back to 2000. Maybe the COVID one we're taking is, but these technologies, they've been dosing immuno-oncology patients for 20 years safely. So
Yeah,
it's
it was
just a
actually.
misnomer, but we're going to, John,
I will talk a little bit. There was actually an interesting article in New York Times written by two doctors saying how do you talk to someone who is like vaccine not skeptical, suspicious, haven't taken it, worried about taking it, and it was written as a sort of question and answer thing. It was somewhat patronising in tone, I'll be honest, but some of it was sort of pretty valid. Um, but I think to me, we talked about this, several weeks ago. The difference between me and my children is I had every childhood illness going, and then vaccines were rolled out as I got older, and my kids have had none of those childhood illnesses, which is why when it comes to something like a COVID vaccine, I'm there at the front of the queue if I can, as early as possible. I want that thing in my arm because I see the benefit of that kind of thing, and it's almost like people have forgotten that they've forgotten the significance of illnesses that we no longer consider significant, like polio and measles and rubella and these things that actually, if you had them back in the 60s and 70s and earlier than that, could be really nasty. But
Yeah.
because we've actually dealt with them, people don't worry about them anymore. But they're not thinking it was vaccination that did that. It's almost like these were trivial illnesses. They were never trivial illnesses, but we've managed to basically get them under control.
Yeah, John, we'll talk about this in a minute, but in countries that are resource poor, those are afflictions that are still
Absolutely.
killing people. We don't think about polio and measles, mumps, and rubella, all the things we get vaccinated. These are killing people. John, I think when I talk to somebody, I kind of have some certain probing questions like, oh, did you take the flu vaccine? And when people say, oh, yeah, I've taken the flu vaccine forever. And then you say, well, you're not getting the COVID vaccine. That doesn't, there's that mindset. Those people are a little bit confusing to me. I'm like, boy, but most of the people are like, no, I've never had a flu vaccine and I don't want a COVID vaccine. And then you'll say, have you gotten the flu before? Yeah. They'll say yes. And it's like, oh boy, it's hard. It's almost hard to like, and one of them's a family member. This is a conversation I'm having with a family member who's like, no, I don't get anything. I'm like, oh boy, I don't know. I should be careful here. These are my opinions, not the opinions of KCAS, but go get vaccinated as
Sure.
often as whatever it is. Like I'm rolling up my sleeve for, I think the next thing I'm due for is like a pneumococcal vaccine, John. I'm all in. I'm just, I want to live by the medicines that are available. And, some of the mindset, if you philosophically or however you want to think of it, for me, it's like, we're blessed to have it available. I'm going to go get it.
Funny you mentioned that because I had a medical last week, and actually we were talking through stuff, and the nurse practitioner asked me how you doing on vaccines, and I had a hepatitis B where I'd missed the final dose because it was due of July last year, but because of COVID there was no doctors open. So she said, well, we'll give you that, and then, well, have you had the pneumococcal? And I'm like, well, no. It's like, well, we'll give you that. I'm like, yeah, fine, I'll take it, and it's definitely I'm up for
shingles vaccines, whatever I can get, I'm taking them.
Shingles I need to ask about, because that's one. I had shingles when I was 5, and it was actually really, really nasty. I was off school for 3 months, and I still, less so now, but certainly as an adult, I used to, if I got really nervous about a situation, all my head would prickle, and it's basically my shingle scar would start itching and stuff. It was an interesting.
I had about, John, when I was 13, I had something pop up on my back that they eventually said it was stress related, and they said, oh, it's shingles. I didn't even know what the heck it was. I haven't had it since, but I know it was painful, and treated it topically, and it's something I don't want to experience again. I can only imagine what 3 months was like. I missed 3 days and thought I was dying. You must have that even now, I bet you, is bringing back some emotions and thinking about that. John, let's talk about a little bit of the inequity of vaccines, right? Tell us a little bit. So we know there's a good side. Those between 12 to 15 years of age can get vaccinated, although, again, there's a lot of people that say, well, they don't get sick. Why should they? And I'm just like, you just take it, don't think too much. But what about, I think it's really important we touch on some of the rollouts and.
This is what I find sort of frustrating, is that people here who have the choice are choosing not to take something that could help save their lives. But there's a lot of countries where they don't even have that choice. It's there's a bunch of articles on this, but the one I found was the Washington Post. Is basically talking COVID vaccine inequality. Richer countries have fared better than poorer ones in vaccine rollout. It is a good article, and the map of how various countries are doing was a really nice little graphic, which I'm not going to particularly touch on. But basically, we talked about this, that Western countries and rich countries have really cornered the market in terms of making sure that their populations are vaccinated. And it's basically, so far, 45% of all vaccine doses administered so far have gone to just 16% of the world's population. in what the World Bank considers high-income countries. This is going to be the challenge going forward. Is definitely how do we get the vaccine out to other countries, um, and make sure that this is a global solution, right, as opposed to just wealthy countries being sorted and other countries struggling to catch up. And we there's and I'll roll it into the next article, because in amongst this, we've seen that obviously India's dealing with additional variants. It's major problems in terms of new cases and deaths. And I don't know if you saw the drone photos on the banks of the Ganges this weekend, where with all the bodies buried there, where mostly they're attributing it to COVID.
I
mean, it's tragic what's going there. But a lot of the doses for poorer countries were to come from the Serum Institute, but India's got so much of an issue that's not happening. The other piece is Novavax, which had committed a lot of doses to the COVAX, the global distribution system, that's been pushed back and pushed back. So it's still not even at the stage where it's going to be authorized for use. So that source of vaccines isn't there either. So we're finding that other countries are turning to China. So the Sinovac and Sinopharm doses, or Sinovac and Sinopharm vaccines, and there's concerns because the efficacy numbers aren't as good as the vaccines that we've been dealing with. But ultimately, what choice do countries have? And it's really, we need to. And then this has obviously geopolitical impact, because China is that and increases their influence in various countries. I'm not judging this. I'm just saying this is
it's a dual sword there. You don't want to, you want the vaccine, but you also don't want to promote some of what China's about, right? This is going to give them fuel to say, oh, hey, trust us, right? Or I don't know. I'm, like you said, I'm not a geopolitical, but it makes you twitch a little bit if you think about China supplying the world with vaccines when we should, the U.S. or other countries. But it's been a double whammy, right? Like you said, there's already, I think there's some stats I shared with you, right? There's 1.37 billion doses have been administered as of, like, I think it was I'm going to say the 16th of May is when I saw these stats. And 83% of those shots have been in high income, and only 0.3% of the doses have been given in low income countries. John, that you factor that in. And then remember India and the Serum Institute, we talked about that. They were supposed to be one of the big suppliers. That is now completely put on halt. I read about that due to the COVID outbreak. They've just almost shut down, right? Or they have shut down. But that causes a blip. And then you mentioned Novavax. Well, heck, the two people who were supposed to be supplying, then you're right. The world is going to start looking at China and maybe even Russia. I would imagine they're probably going to be coming to the forefront as well. But
yeah,
it's just so mind-boggling to think about how we've got vaccines just right now. I think you could walk into any clinic in Kansas City, get a vaccine shot, by the way. They're popping up everywhere.
Yeah, I actually read something in passing. I should have spent more time with it, but someone had posted on Twitter they couldn't get vaccinated in Italy, but they could drive 60 miles north to San Marino and pay like €60 for the Sputnik vaccine. So yeah, you're right. It's a similar thing where the Russian vaccine or the Chinese are more available to other places. But touching on that like I said, like that Washington Post graphic about they basically graded the countries by wealth all down to the poorest nations, and then sort of talk about how many vaccine doses, etc. But it was one of the ones that blew my mind was actually Tanzania, where it's not really seen as the poorest country. It's towards the poorer end, but it's basically said they've got no need for vaccine. It's like, what is going through their minds? It's like I'm just like sitting here thinking we've been talking about this all year, knowing what this can do, and yet you've got a government saying, nah, we're not interested. Yeah, we're okay. It's like, yes.
It does baffle you a little bit. You want them to tune into the world news and take a look at what's kind of happened in the last year, currently happening in India. That should
absolutely
stoke everybody to want to go get vaccinated. So, John, really some palpable stuff there in terms of what the impacts and just how fortunate we are to
But
be able to get
one last thing, I'll let this truck go past because it's making a lot of noise. It's interesting how even then though that even in these countries you're still going to have to deal with um, suspicion about vaccines, and this they actually the one article, and this is not a Washington Post, this was a Bloomberg article, closed with a quote from uh, a 29-year-old worker in Zimbabwe who said, "We're being told these vaccines are meant to get rid of Africans, so for now I will watch and observe those that have been inoculated. I don't want to be a part of an experiment of an outcome I don't know." And it's still it's so you've got this global suspicion. It's like, how do you counter that? Because even I mean, if I was in one of these countries, knowing that yes, the vaccine had finally made it there, I'd be obviously like at the front of the queue to get vaccinated. But even if we get vaccines to these poorer countries that currently have no access, they still have a skepticism that they've got to overcome to roll it out, which is just incredible. There is obviously a real challenge there.
Yeah. And we think we're skeptical of our government, right? They're
Yeah,
skeptical
yes,
on a whole nother level, right? Like, wow. Yeah, that's a powerful thing you touched on in terms of, that the 29-year-old Zimbabwe worker who said, I don't want to be a part of an experiment of an outcome I don't know. So it's scary.
yeah, yeah.
I think and it touches on just what we were speaking of. They don't trust the Chinese vaccines. They're not trusting the Russian vaccines. They probably don't trust any vaccine because somewhere in there's, I don't know, John, I can only imagine there probably has been some experimentation that's taken place throughout the history of Africa that we don't know about. I don't know.
Bound to be,
That would
yeah,
be scary.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyhow, let's move on to maybe I think this is our last COVID story, right?
Yep.
This is one of my favorite topics, a combo vaccine. That's certainly what I've been hoping for. And tell us a little bit more about how that's all going.
So this is Novavax. While they're actually still moving their COVID only vaccine through through clinical trials, they've actually been working on a combination between COVID and flu. And this is really they're doing it with the recognition that the similar well, flu's more of a mutation thing, which is why different things each year. But with COVID, we're likely to need booster shots. So anticipating the need for boosters, Novavax have really are starting to look at a combo shot, and they did preliminary studies in ferrets and hamsters to show that actually the combination of the two vaccines produced antibodies against both viruses at levels comparable at what was seen with either administered alone. So certainly they're not seeing any interaction issues, at least in animal studies. So it's that first hopeful step to having the rollout of something that can deal with two at once.
Yeah, no, that was good. It's important to note what you just said. They didn't see any damage to lungs. It was still protective, all good things in those preclinical models. And looks like they hit a little bit of a manufacturing hurdle to kind of prevent it from going. But no, this is a big, kind of be nice to be able to go in and get a combo shot. I think I don't know. It seems logical to me. I don't begin to fully grasp if there's any cocktail problems with co-administration of a vaccine, but I think it's a wonderful approach, and I feel like this is what it'll be about in coming
Yeah,
years.
it's certainly something you've referred to in
Yeah,
conversation. I thought it was worth highlighting.
no,
Actually,
it's good.
the manufacturing issues are part of what's delayed their actual single COVID vaccine. So that's not so much on this.
Yeah, and then,
But
and then you do worry about, like, is the flu, because it was pretty much non-existent this year, as
Mhm,
reported. Is it going to
sure.
come back with furious vengeance, so to speak, this year? So I don't know. Well, to be determined. And my sense is, I don't know. We were talking about this the other day. I think a lot of people in cold regions they'll wear face masks just to stay warm. I think you're going to see more of it during flu and cold season. I mean that. Like, I think.
Yes, someone else said that, and I'm trying to think where that was, but I read that somewhere. I'm like, I mean, I have to say, I'm being assiduous mask wearer, but I hate the damn things. But
Oh yeah,
I'm not going to not wear them if it's the right thing to do, you know.
yeah.
But yeah, I can't see me doing that
I
next
still have it in my pocket everywhere I go. It doesn't, I just,
Sure. Yep.
it's going to be
Absolutely.
part of me, or I'll leave. I'll probably carry one, and I don't want to say perpetude, but just in case. There's still some places that are like, oh, we service a lot of elderly. We want you to wear a mask. I was in a small Asian market picking up some supplies. That supplies would be, spices and foods, right? And they made you wear a mask because I asked him. I said, "Why are you still wearing a mask?" He's like, "Oh, I service a lot of elderly, and we just want to keep them safe." So I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yep.
but it was,
It's all about looking after
yeah.
everyone, isn't it? Yeah.
So that little bit of an up. We're gonna move on to our non-COVID news, John. Something near and dear to us, right? This clinical trials are ramping back up, right? So
Yeah,
tell us.
yes. So again, we've talked about this on and off, but certainly in the early days when COVID really started to have an impact, a lot of clinical trials were being shut down, so or delayed or postponed, whatever. But now they're saying trials ramping back up, but the slow take up of places remain a barrier. So the sort of so we talked about, when the pandemic started, various trials got closed down. That has all leveled up in terms of the rates it's begun to happen. Um, and it's actually the ones that are actually had initiated enrollment before the pandemic are actually doing better at picking up where they left off, rather than studies that are trying to enroll fresh people. So an interesting contrast there. But there's also, I mean, I think subjects have concern about, what might they pick up when they're attending a trial.
Mhm.
So part of the challenge for clinical facilities is to say, how can we design what's our strategy for clinical trial design to try and, obviously mitigate things to make sure that we're keeping people safe in a post COVID-19 environment.
Mm. Yeah, interesting, John. Just in terms of, it was interesting to say if you had a spot in line, that if you had already been in a clinical trial, that now that the pandemic's been lifted, sort of, and the enrollment's begun, that's going well, right? That's what you said. And then if you're trying to get a new trial, that's where the challenges are happening. Interesting. I don't know what that all means, but I do think they're doing, like you said, there's a couple ways they're trying to mitigate the number of visits, right? They're trying to do more virtual things,
Yeah,
but at the end
yeah.
of the day, in order to get a sample from somebody, they still got to go somewhere. So
Yeah, I
there's
think
some,
that a lot of that might be those sort of, the basic health assessments that don't require a medical
yeah,
person to do it.
yeah,
I think there's going to be we'll probably hear more about virtual visits, phone interviews, and self administration and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, you're right. If we're doing samples as part of a PK assessment, they have to be in the clinic getting samples taken.
yeah.
So
And I wonder, even with, that a lot of times people would do first in human studies to make some money, and now that there's this kind of increase in, sort of, how do I say it? There's a lot of stimulus, so I wonder if that's having any impact. Apparently not, is what we'd be reading. We haven't heard of that, but I wonder how that's
yeah,
playing a role in here. Just as I think about it, there's a
sure.
lot of people who do first in human trials. I wonder if that's something to look at. I wonder if the price of admission has gone up, so to speak. I wonder if they're enticing them more. But anyway, John,
Yeah, don't know. I mean,
fascinating stuff.
it's an interesting question, certainly.
Yeah,
Yes. So that's the news. Shall we move on to the main topic?
yeah, John. What a
Um,
main topic we
this
have,
so,
right?
so I neutralised this a little bit, but what we're going to talk about is the need for regulation in the pharma industry, oversight of manufacturing issues and clinical trials. Because we've had there's been some interesting, entertaining news over the past few weeks where, we talked in a podcast several weeks ago about the 10 main manufacturing companies helping roll out, COVID doses and things like that. And we talked about who was collaborating with which pharma companies, which were global, which were US based, etc. But one of the ones that was in one of the companies that was in that article was Emergent, who really have been in the news for really not the right reasons, sadly for them. So I'll give a bit of background. Basically, Emergent have been one of the big players in manufacturing vaccines, but there's been a lot of focus on a plant in Baltimore that was actually contracted to produce both AstraZeneca and J&J vaccines. The first main the first time this really became out there for the public was there was a New York Times article that said that there'd been a mix-up in terms of vectors used in the AstraZeneca and J&J vaccines, which had resulted in 15 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine being thrown away. But then that was just the initial piece. Then the next piece of news was the FDA directed J&J to take control of the site away from Emergent, and AstraZeneca then had to go and look for a new site for manufacture of their vaccine, which isn't too surprising when you think that the AstraZeneca vaccine really hasn't been used in the US, so it's really of limited impact in this country. I'll just say one last thing and then throw it out to you. So Emergent had protested that its quality control system worked as planned in identifying the manufacturing snafu, choosing to prevent a picture of normality. Maintain that they continue to own and operate the facility as before and plans to use the 23 million from an expanded task order with BARDA to buy more equipment while aligning with the US government and AstraZeneca on a mutually agreed ramp down of manufacturing for AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine bulk drug substance. This was an Emergent statement as this happened about the shift over to J&J, and then more appeared in the news, and that's when it really, you realised how bad things were, and that's why I want to talk about it, because it really plays into all of us in the contract research. All of us in contract research organisations and the rules we have to adhere to, and what the behind everything with this Baltimore plant is they weren't adhering to the rules, and I'll let you say what you want to say.
Well, I think we're so this is something that you and I are always on chomping at the bit to read about. So maybe the audience can, well, take a small step back and just say, if you're not familiar with Emergent, John kind of talked about it. They're a CDMO. They manufacture vaccines. They have always been, in retrospect, background wise, they were probably, not always the most reputable lab, unfortunately. But like you said, a year ago, they had gotten some dings, and that's, that was well before they started. They were probably on the cusp of getting all this influx. They've won $1.3 billion worth of contracts, John. So
sure.
Before they win all this, they get a couple. They have a site visit. They have a couple findings in there, and that's the stuff that we work so hard not to have any of those, right? They're called 43s in our world. Our last FDA audit, we didn't have any 43s. We've gotten them. It's not the end of the world, but that's a moment to get better. Well, they had some issues that apparently they probably never really addressed. And then, John, as you said, for them to come out and paint a picture of normalcy, that really hurt them, because it started with, so the first thing that really set the alarms off was they started seeing some issues, some reactions to people in that large, what was it, 12 million doses they made, I think it was. And then we had, there was some, couple here and there, but that created further investigation into Emergent. So not only was it that big lot that got kind of recalled, then that's when Pandora's box got open. So I'll stop and take a breath, because that, just to set the tonality of things, as with most things, I think of it, I'm struggling with my 15-year-old, trying to raise him. The moment I see one small string of something, I'm like, oh boy, I better go investigate this. And that's kind of what happened, right? So they see these doses out there, and then they're like, oh, what does this mean? And that's where it's just, John, I think the word that comes to mind is maybe some laziness, which scares me. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm going to step back. So again, why we're talking about this and how it applies to us when we're supporting a study that's submitted for submission to the FDA. The FDA are fully entitled to come and do an inspection of our facility to ensure that everything is in place, that our product is data. So if they do an inspection, they want to know that our processes are adequate, our training is sufficient, that the data that we've produced to support a clinical trial is fully, you can fully stand behind it, and it justifies the progression of the drug. Just going back, so I thought this was amazing that they actually talked about the 483. So the 483 form is something that the FDA inspector will issue to the lab with a number of questions or things that need to be addressed, or findings that they've noticed in the course of the inspection. The one from a year ago, so this is way in advance of COVID, they had they cited inadequately trained personnel, improperly secured records, proper testing procedures weren't followed correctly. So here's what I'm saying: you've got methods that you should follow, they weren't doing it. People weren't trained to do their job. And then deficient efforts to prevent contamination or mix-ups. They basically they obviously they slammed the quality unit, and for us, obviously the quality assurance unit are vital in terms of keeping us aligned with what we're doing, because that's why when we run a study, everything goes through our QAU to ensure that, again, we've said we're doing what we've recorded, what we're doing, and what we're doing aligns with our procedures. And there's astonishing things like staff couldn't just delete or manipulate electronic data. I mean, there was like, I think it's elsewhere, it says that they were changing dates on pieces of electronic data after the fact. And then what the FDA cited was there was no investigations being done by the company, so it
Yeah,
really deficient. And
yeah,
then fast forward 12 months, we get another FDA inspection, and they're finding exactly the same things.
yeah.
So it's, yeah,
It,
it's
it's shocking to us, John. I mean, look, we're all human, so I don't want to,
true. Yeah,
but there's a couple things you're, kind of touching on that I want to highlight a little more. That it goes back to September of 2020, right? No, the April of 2020 is the
April,
first ever.
April, yeah, yep,
And they say just what you said. They said that your systems allow for potential data manipulations, right? So in our world, you can't change a data bit without it being flagged, and apparently
sure,
they must have
yep,
had some lack of CFR 21 compliance. That's what that falls under.
exactly,
But that's
yep,
just, if you can't do that, that really sends a shockwave to people like you and I. It's like, whoa, what else are they doing, right? And they
yep,
clearly state, these things could result in potential separate or defined areas to prevent contamination or mix-ups are deficient regarding operations relating to the holding of rejected components after disposition. That's the FDA said it to them. So this is back in April. And
yep,
then to your
yep.
point, in September, they come back, they still didn't do it. And then, of course, we have what happens in February of this year.
Oh, it's
It's,
eight, and then April 2021 was another FDA
oh,
inspection. It ended on April 20th, and another 9-comment 483 with, I mean,
the same
equally
thing.
egregious things going on. Yeah, yeah.
It's
I
just,
mean,
that's lazy in our world. That's
sure.
just the lack
Yeah,
of, I think they know the right thing. They couldn't be in existence this long, but it's really, it's frightening. Like, it feels like the FDA did what they're supposed to do. It's almost, I don't know, John. As I read
yeah.
more into this, I'm somewhat flabbergasted and almost speechless, which rarely happens to me.
Yeah, exactly, and yeah, we don't have to go through the 9 findings, but I mean, it is astonishing, and we've seen things like this in the past where, you know, where major 483s are cited, and if the company pushes back so much, it can shut places down. I mean, MDS in Montreal is the big case in point for Bioanalytical, where they had a number of findings, and their response was not what you would expect to give back to the FDA, and eventually meant they went out of business, and companies then had to find other other sources to do their bioanalytical work for them.
Yeah, there's been a few of those in
Hmm.
history. I'm surprised this. I wonder what the history will like. Not the history. What's the coming days for Emergent? Are they rebounding from this, John? Like, what's the latest? They had this. Are they
As
coming
far
out of this? Or are they getting shut down? I mean, this is
it,
surprising.
it's certainly going to be one to watch. I don't know. I mean, the latest news that I saw was that the Emergent founder and executive chairman Fouad El-Hibri and CEO Robert Kramer were to testify May 19th before the House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus. I haven't seen any feedback on that. I mean, it's less than a week ago. Probably should do some digging, but honestly, they're basically they were on the hook to discuss Emergent's failure to maintain its manufacturing plants, train employees, and comply with FDA standards. If they don't give adequate answers to that, I mean, it could really doom the business, I would have thought. So,
But it's almost like because of the lack of, let's call it, capacity in the CDMO space, you wonder if that's even an option. They're probably going
sure,
to want to
yeah,
fix it,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, possibly, yeah, you're right. Yeah, because at the time we talked earlier about trying to get vaccines distributed across the globe, and it's we want as much manufacturing capacity as possible, but ultimately, is it worthwhile having capacity at a place that you can't guarantee that what you get is what you asked for? I mean, that's also part of the decision making here. So
this just fuels the skepticism, John, right?
yeah,
Now you know why
exactly.
there are, people in Zimbabwe saying, I don't want to take the vaccine because I don't want to be experimented on. It's these types of, if it's these types of stories that can be like just misconstrued. If I don't know a lot about the medical field, I'm reading these things, I'm horrified.
Sure.
I'm running
Yeah.
away from a vaccine. I'm like, I've never taken one, right? Like
No,
that's
yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right to be horrified by this kind of situation, but this is the exception. And actually, by the 483 process, the FDA largely keeps most of us honest.
That's a
Most
good
of us.
point.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a great point, John. It's actually working. So
yes,
that's what
yeah,
this is about. Although maybe we'd like to have prevented the vaccine from ever going out, but it's good to see that, like, the inspections prior to COVID, the warning signs were there. Bad people do bad things, but at least the FDA is kind of holding
sure.
their weight here.
Yeah.
That's one silver lining out of this
And
story.
I think that's why it was important to say this really is about the need for regulation in the pharma industry. We although it can be onerous, we all really welcome it because it really does help when bad things happen. We have one more case to talk about that they're found and they're isolated, and the vast majority of us are being honest in our daily business. So I mean, the FDA is essential, and ultimately because of this process, it means that the drugs that you get administered to you are largely safe, or they have side effects that are known, so that we're prepared for patients. If you're given a particular drug, you know what might be an issue if you're given that drug. That's what comes from this process, and yeah, that's it. I thought the emergence of the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, it actually sometimes I'm a little like, man, we got a lot of red tape. Maybe I'm dating myself.
Sure. Yep.
A lot of hoops to jump through, but these safeguards that are in place, it's actually making me think, wow, this is part of why we have all these safeguards. It's actually more comforting to know the energy, the investment of time and money is all worth it, right? This type of process is important, because if not, you have these horrific stories. This is just a horrible. It's kind of a bad story, right? Like, this is not a good thing that what happened here, especially as we break down the 3 or 4 opportunities they've had to correct it, and still they haven't. And
Sure.
John, back to as I'm gleaming through information here, there's a really Kramer is their current CEO, and he says it was kind of funny because their executive it's not there's nothing funny about it. The executive vice president in charge of manufacturing and technical operations, he took a personal leave of absence, John.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's a personal leave of absence when you're responsible for the manufacturing of these. Sounds, what's the word, ominous, or a little, I'm not, but I imagine that individual feels terrible, and all of this. It does start with leadership, in my opinion.
Sure.
I
Yep.
think they have to be held culpable, and I'm sure, the new CEO here is trying his best, although shares of the company are just dropping more than 50%. In fact, Friday they lost 13% of their shares. Interesting though, John. Just fascinating to dig in deeper here
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
just the amount of money that was thrown at this company, right? Like, oh,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they got huge contracts because they were almost like the biggest biggest US-based company in terms of receiving
Yeah,
contracts,
it kind of
etc.
reeks of some politicalness here, and we're not going to
Yeah,
go down that path. But as I read some of this, you wonder in time if there'll be some political hand slapping as well. I
sure.
can only
Yeah,
imagine some of the oversight committees that awarded, 628 million, or the total works out to a little over a billion. What was it, 1.2 billion total?
sure.
You wonder how they touch on that. Some of those administrators, I'm sure, are going to have
Yeah.
some
So
questions
yeah,
to answer.
one thing I didn't mention, and just I think this is also this is where it stands. As the FDA said in a statement, April 21st, at the agency, and this is post that 9.483, at the agency's request, Emergent Biosolutions has agreed to pause new production while it works with the FDA to resolve potential quality issues. For the vaccines already manufactured, the products will undergo additional testing and will be thoroughly evaluated to ensure their quality before any potential distribution. So it's this isn't going to resolve anytime quickly. It'll be very interesting to see how
Yeah.
this how this moves forward.
It is, John, that I feel like we're tackling this. It's really a case study for guys like you and I in terms of bioanalytical note, not to do. It's not just bioanalytical. It's just in general. I'll say GLP, GMP, CRO no nos 101. That's what all this
Exactly.
is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but
I think that's what's so shocking, that some of these things are so basic. They've been ingrained in us for years. But here you have a facility where they just weren't doing it. Like I say,
yeah.
it could be laziness, could be whatever. But yeah, I'd be really surprised. I'd be really surprised if there weren't a number of people lost their jobs over
Oh
this,
yeah,
because
yeah.
this is huge.
There's already one executive vice president. I'm sure the CEO here is in
Yeah.
trouble
Sure.
as well. But John, we just staying on our agenda topics here. We talked about some historical perspectives, the need of manufacturing capacity. We observe. What about, like, we talked about the underlying causes, but I think it's interesting. Let's touch a little bit about some of the KCS processes that we have in place to prevent some of this. I feel like every CRO has a standalone QAU, right? Quality Assurance Unit. But John, really what's separating us is our metrics, right? We've implemented some incredible metrics since our QA director joined us almost 2 years
Sure.
ago now. Tracy, she joined us a couple years ago, and we're really investing a lot into understanding. They forecast just like we do in business development. They have capacity forecasts, they have production schedules, and they have metrics, all things that she brought on board to really help prevent this, right?
Yep. Yep.
This is a big investment on our part. I don't know, John. Those are I think for us, I kind of touched on it. I think most people have metrics, right? But I think the sophistication of ours, and maybe we can drill down, I don't know if today or another podcast maybe, but then of course we pride ourselves in understanding our forecasting and capacity. It doesn't matter what department you're in. Those words are two words you have to use. So, John, I'll let you maybe share anything else you want to add to our process, and then
I,
we can kind of
yeah,
wrap this up.
I think you're right. The QA unit are really key to this, and the fact that they're monitoring how many findings they have, how quickly findings are being resolved, how many investigations are ongoing, helping investigations. It's really critical to help maintain a quality operation.
And then
So
software, right? We're
yeah,
using
yeah,
artificial intelligence now through Adrian software. We have a QC, QA automation that we're using for review that takes, we talked about that with Stephanie Passes Pharma when she was on our podcast. That's another advancement. Again, another investment, another thing that separates us from our
sure.
competition when it
Yeah,
comes to quality.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and this isn't just KCS, but this is most bioanalytical facilities. The fact is, you're doing you have all your workstations. You log in as yourself. You log out. The next person logs in as yourself. They log out when you're doing work, and that everyone's very strong in that. We have a LIMS system that operates the same way, but actually, again, citing this emergent article, actual people were operating under each other's signature, which I mean is just unthinkable to
Well,
me.
no,
But
that's an IT safeguard.
yeah,
That's
absolutely.
lazy. That's an easy fix. Those are
Yeah,
things that you just need a quality IT person to make
mhm,
sure that every time that workstation locks, that's it. You can't, if you try to open it back up, you got to log in as you. Or you can't
Yes,
do some of
yes.
those things. Because everybody has universal workstations. That doesn't, but the fact that they didn't have any safeguards in place, and then you mentioned limbs, that's locked down. We can't changing data in limbs is like you're going to send flags throughout
Yeah,
the
yeah.
system if you try to change a data bit in limbs.
Yeah, we're lucky that we have, in terms of instrumentation, we have manufacturers who are all on board with this too, and so I mean they have good audit trails within Watson and within the SciEx
Yeah.
software and all this
I mean,
kind of thing.
John, we've
So,
been around so long on the LBA side. We've got 3 platforms that we help those vendors get CFR 21 compliant. The very thing you're talking about, we help
yeah,
educate them on. So we got a history here.
hmm
Yeah, good stuff.
yeah,
A lot of
but
proud of our quality at KCS. So
exactly that yeah. I mean, if I wasn't proud of the quality of the organization, I wouldn't be here.
well, no, that's
Simple as
true.
that,
But I think it's even this stems from our CEO, right?
Yep,
John's vision of things. That's always been quality is number
it's
one.
paramount.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I'm totally. It's the most important thing is quality throughout in terms of documentation, your data, and everything else.
Yeah,
Quality.
reliable and defendable. That's part of our model.
Exactly.
So what? And then
Which is why when the if the FDA do arrive, largely you're in good shape because you've got good
yeah,
systems that are checking you. It's anyway. So just as one other thing, one other topic which is slightly related, but we have had occasional instances of this, but it that again indicating why the FDA is so important. And this was feds charge another CRO staffer with faking data in a GlaxoSmithKline pediatric asthma study. And this was a Miami CRO. We've got their name here somewhere. Unlimited Medical Research, and it was 4 people fabricated participation of patients in the study between 2013 and 2016. The purported mastermind of the scheme, a woman named Evelise Villemin Ben Cosme, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud in January. It was sentenced to 63 months in prison and was also had to forfeit $174,000. So this is basically they take the money from GSK. They say we've had all these patients, and they hadn't, and it was all fake stuff. So again, this is how important it is to have that oversight to catch these. Again, I must emphasize outliers, but people are always on the lookout for the quick buck. And yes,
it's scary. I found the name of that company. I don't know if you want me to say it. It's TELUS Clinical Research.
oh really? Okay, because
TELUS Clinical Research is the name of that company
okay.
in Miami Dade, and feel like the head of it is Dr. Martin Valdez. I feel like I might know that individual. It seems,
Yeah.
but that's scary, John. That's another form, and then I feel like there's been a couple other. Yeah, that what it does to guys like you and I is how many are we not catching? And
Sure.
now I'm going
Yeah.
back to scaring everybody. I don't want to do
Yeah.
that. I think there's probably very few instances of this, and I'll stand by good people are good in general, right? So I don't know.
I think so. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it's like I say, it's just it really most people are trying to do things the right way, but we still need that oversight just to try and catch those who aren't doing things the right way or
Yeah,
think they can think they
John,
can.
they got sentenced to some prison. Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
wonder how deep the emergent might go. I wonder if there's, as they start to dig through this, I'm sure it's not the end. There'll be a lot of litigation, I'm sure, against emergent. I wonder how close some of them might become to criminal activity
yeah.
such as this. So
No,
I don't know. I'm okay with that. I think if you do these sorts of things, you should find yourself behind bars.
sure.
No, no, great, good stuff.
Certainly on the faking stuff, I totally agree with you on that. I think yeah, we'll see with the emergent where that all goes.
Yeah, no, John, this has been a good discussion. I don't have any final words of advice around this. It's been enjoyable to talk about. We've been building up to this emergent story. I think as we learn more, we might touch on it in the future. But
Yep.
I hope the audience enjoyed us sort of breaking this down and kind of how our worlds, again, this is a case study for everyone at KCS or any GLP, GMP environment on what not to do. And those
Sure,
are great
absolutely.
things to
Yes,
learn from.
yes.
So this is good learning for the industry. Again, more positive approaches to what's happening. This should be a plus for us.
And I think that has been the case with all. I mean, I've been in this industry, 26 years, but for us in bioanalytical, there's only been two major cases. One was the MDS, and the other was a facility in Texas. But the industry as a whole has taken them as learning opportunities, and it has obviously helped, fine tune how bioanalytical facilities operate.
Yeah, those are the two. There's been some academic ones as well, but I forget trying to look for that Texas company, but that is the other big. You're right. There's only a couple real cases of true, let's call criminal, fraud type things that had occurred. Can't find that Texas
I
company.
can't remember the name.
It'll come to me as I don't want to say the wrong name, because then I'm creating some issues. But anyhow, great stuff, John. I with that, I don't have anything else, John. We can, so John, you kind of touched on, podcast 42, right?
Yep.
Talk about the state of play with vaccines. I like that, the up and coming and the next generation. So that'll be an exciting podcast number 42. But as we wind down here, John,
unless we find something better and push it
no,
back to
that let's roll with that. We've got. I don't know about you, John. What's coming up? We're heading towards Memorial Day. You got anything going on?
This is quite a tumultuous period for us. So yesterday was the last day of the Premier League season. So, congratulations to Manchester City and commiserations to the three who dropped out.
I'm just kidding. No, it was a good season. They had a great season. And John, I don't know how much you know. They started off so rocky. When they started off the season, everybody was ready to get rid of Pep Guardiola, and now he's just coaching the year.
Yeah. So the nice thing, why I wanted to mention that was I watched the Leicester City versus Spurs game, but they actually had fans in the ground, which was, so people are actually starting to be allowed to go back. Actually, it was a rather bittersweet weekend for me as a sports fan, because Hereford actually made it to Wembley for the FA Trophy final. Second time they got to Wembley in 6 years, I think.
Oh, wow.
They lost in the FA Vase and they lost in the FA Trophy. So they've had two visits to Wembley. So far, they're 0 for 2. So hopefully they can get back there next year. So that was a bit.
John, it was a really exciting. I understand your love of your, what are they, Champions League, or they're one league? What league is Hereford in?
They're in Conference North, so way down there.
John, the Premier League yesterday was very exciting. You touched on the Spurs Leicester City game. So it's pretty unique in that three teams were vying for fourth place or third and fourth, respectively. And that results in Champions League, which I'll touch on in a minute, because that's an exciting thing coming up Saturday as well. The Leicester City lost to the Spurs. So the Spurs win allowed Chelsea to sneak in, right? My team. They lost had a poor game. Boy, did they come up small against Aston Villa, who's, by the way, had one of the best seasons in their history, I would imagine, because they had a strong year. So the loss of Chelsea would have put them out if Leicester had won that game. And Spurs, who didn't have much to play for, but thanks to Harry Kane and Gareth Bale, they eked out a nice victory, which put my Chelsea into the Champions League. But at one point it was 2-1. Leicester was winning, and that made for some nervous time for all of us Chelsea fans. So anyhow, it was really exciting. And of course, Liverpool had a massive goal last week by their goalie, which is I could sit here and chat all day about how important and massive that's one of the biggest goals in English Premier League history. Not only was just the sixth goalie, he's the first one in Liverpool history to score a goal as a goalie. That goal put them the win, and is the only reason why they made it into the Champions League. So that ended up being big, although they had to win a couple games in between that. So great year overall. Although the relegation this year was the bottom three were settled, I don't know, weeks ago. Those bottom three were bad. So John, a great talk. And then Saturday, I'm excited for the Champions League final between Man City and Chelsea, and no one's given Chelsea a chance in that game.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because obviously they won recently against Manchester City.
And-
So next season, I'll probably be more engaged on the Premier League stuff because Norwich City are coming up, and that's where my wife is from.
Well, John, with
my-
a bit of luck, maybe I'll be visiting our new partners, and maybe I'll catch my first Premier League game,
There you
which
go.
is
Yeah,
on
that'd
my
be-
bucket list, John. That is
Yes.
high on my list.
Yes.
Almost pulled the trigger in 2016 to go see Spurs play Chelsea. A friend of mine went over, big Spurs fan. He asked me to go with him. I didn't have the courage to go back then, but I will go next time. And John, like you said, Sporting KC, our local MLS team, and I really enjoy the MLS. They're catching fire. They had a nice win, and they have a game Saturday the 29th, full capacity, John, full capacity.
Wow.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting.
Oh,
Yeah.
I have to. I'm going to Colorado for a graduation of my niece graduates high school, so I'll be out of town for a few days. That'll be a fun trip. Me and my siblings are all. None of our significant others are coming, so the four of us have an A. What is it called? An Airbnb or whatever. We rented a house.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
the four of us are staying together for the first time since probably the 80s, I'm guessing.
Wow.
So we're going to have a fun 4 nights total. Should be kind of fun. And you know, I won't be able to go to the Sporting game, but I will make a Sporting KC game because the Cauldron, which is where all the crazy general admission people stand throughout the game, is one of my favorite places to visit, John, because I could be crazy and somebody different there.
So yes, I have to watch the fixtures, and at some point, if I get over to Kansas, then I'll
Yeah,
have to
and you
go
know,
and do it.
even Kansas City's hosting the men's qualifying matches, which is great. So our park is amazing.
Good.
Children's Mercy Park, it's called. It looks like a Premier League stadium. It seats like 20,000. It's a fantastic venue. They're hosting 3 USA games this week, which is going to cause a tremendous influx of people into Kansas City. Unfortunately, I would have gone to some of those games. I'm going to be out of town. I would have loved to have seen the U.S. men's national team try to qualify for the World Cup. So we're a soccer city, John. This is a good city to. We have a lot of soccer.
So we're Airbnb-ing this week as well. This weekend. So once you got a long weekend, it made sense to tack a couple more days on it, and we're going over to New Paltz. So again, to do somewhere between here and Boston, so my son can come over. And New Paltz was where my daughter did our first degree. So yeah, it'd be nice to do that. But the big news for here is tomorrow, May the 25th. We may actually be getting our ovens installed.
Oh wow! What is this? 8 months now? How long you been waiting?
It's 9 months. Spoke to the electrician today. He says, "Well, we're ready. We're trying to contact the inspector to make sure he's ready." So it's still a little bit of nerves. Still no guarantee it's going to happen.
You're not going to believe it until they show up. Well, John,
exactly.
A lot going on. It's exciting. I can't wait to hear about your. I think it's funny. I don't know what an Airbnb. I can't say that word. I got like a mental block around it. I don't know why, but I'm excited to hear about your trip as well as the oven when we convene. And of course, we'll see how the Warino siblings. There are 4 of us total. How we're all gonna coexist for a few days. It should be fun.
Hopefully you'll go into the house with 4 and come out with 4.
I think we're in good shape. I think the key piece that I said is we won't have our significant others, so that should hopefully allow for a little more less tension. Sometimes that can be although I think actually I shouldn't say that. My families get along very, very well. We have a lot of fun. In fact, we're going to be in Jersey Shore in July is our family reunion this year. We'll be down on the Jersey Shore, which is so sounds funny coming from me, John, if you know what I mean. If you've ever seen the Jersey Shore shows, it's no good that the Warino clan is making their way to the Jersey Shore to, I don't know, maybe perpetuate some stereotypes, I guess. But anyhow, John, it's been great. Enjoy your Memorial Day. I'll let you close us out.
Yeah, it's been a very enjoyable podcast. I mean, yeah, you enjoy your days off. I'm sure that we'll enjoy ours too, and look forward to getting together next time.